some of that.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I do have a Mentimeter link for you all. This is one of the ways we will be getting some feedback from you and getting some participation. So please do join our link if you can. If you need to wait until you have a QR code, we will have that for you shortly. Welcome to the Extended Foster Care Legislative and Practice Updates. This is our annual, I believe, third edition of this webinar. So I'm very excited to be here. My name is Dawn Carini. I am a child welfare program specialist with the Northern Academy. I come from about a decade in child welfare in a rural county, working largely in that time with transition aged youth, specifically in the time period that was super fun and life changing for our foster youth when AB 12 came into play. I had the first foster youth in our county that went into extended foster care, which means that you become like the expert in it because you're the only one who has done it. And so spent a lot of time getting really familiar with policies around that time and trying to figure out how to put that into practice. So coming into doing this webinar each year, it's near and dear to my heart because I know that as policies are coming at us in the field of child welfare, we're constantly trying to figure out what it is that we need to do and how we can best serve the children, youth, and families that we're working with. So I'm excited to be able to bring this panel of experts to your screen wherever you are today, to be able to share some information, to give you some best practices, maybe answer some questions, and give you an opportunity to be in community with each other in this webinar space. I'm going to pass it over to David to introduce himself, and we'll do our introductions, and then we'll get rolling.
Hi, I'm David Myers. Usually I'm the token lawyer, but I think Simone's got me there. No, yeah, I didn't know that. I know most of you, and I've been teaching for the academy for 20 years. I do the legal procedures for core and whatever else they ask me to do. I've also been practicing as a child welfare attorney since 1996, where my first job was representing social workers as what you call county counsel. And so I absolutely love days like this where I get to listen, learn, and maybe say something here and there.
Awesome. We'll pass it over to Simone.
I'm Simone Turek Lee. I am not an attorney. I just play one in training, so I'm just kidding. I have a master's in social work, so I'm definitely not an attorney, but have a lot of attorney colleagues. I'm Simone Turek Lee. I work for John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we are a legislative advocacy organization. We also do a lot of work on implementation and training, hence my presence today on this webinar.
Awesome. And I'm Christina Tanner, and I've been training with the Northern Academy with UC Davis for about a year and a half now. My day-to-day job is working for the Youth Law Center, where we also do a bunch of litigation work, policy work, and legislative work. And so I'm happy to be here with you all to walk you through some of these legislative changes that were made. Pass it back over to you, Don.
All right. It would help if my next button was working. All right, there is the QR code that I promised. We would love to know what counties are being represented in our space today. And since we can't see all your lovely faces, we would love for you to join our Mentimeter either by clicking the link, entering the code on menti.com, or scanning that QR code. You can use your phone to join if your computer does not allow you to do so. We've got Sacramento in the house. The bigger it is, the more people that come from that or that are giving that response. Got Riverside, Shasta, Tehama County, El Dorado, San Mateo, Mendocino, and then they just move on me. Yolo, Santa Cruz, Alameda, Tuolumne. Give it just one more second in case anyone else wants to shout out a county we're not seeing yet. Riverside, in case I didn't say that. I was recently in Riverside, got to stay at the Mission Inn. It was fantastic, so beautiful. And Humboldt County's in the house. All right, thank you all. Kind of gives us an idea of who we have with us today as we're going through our day. So we want today to be a success for everyone, whether this is your first time or you've been with us each time we've presented this webinar. We wanted to make sure to let y'all know that we are recording. No participants, of course, are visible in the recording. And the reason for that is that because we have a transition aged youth resource page through UC Davis, and we wanted to make sure to include this because not everybody is able to be here. There's lots and lots of meetings that happen throughout the week, and we wanted to make sure to make this resource available for anyone who needs it. You don't have to mute yourself. We are in webinar form. I think we maybe thought it was going to be in a Zoom format, but it is webinar, so we're good there. Please do use the chat for comments and questions. You can use emojis to let us know how this is landing, give us a reaction. We love feedback. Also, if as we go along, we'll have a couple of different opportunities on Mentimeter. So do keep that open. We will have the instructions and the link there for you if you need to reopen it for some reason. I am notorious for closing the Mentimeter before it goes to the next time that we need it and then having to reopen it. So that does happen, but please do give us some feedback in Mentimeter as we go along, because that's how we'll be finding out what the challenges are that you are facing in your counties and how we can best support. So for today's agenda, we will be going from 10 to 12. We have some important legislative changes that have happened since 2019 to present and some of the practice implications. So some of the things we talk about are brand new, fresh off the press, and some of the things have been at play for a little bit longer, but that can still be somewhat new in terms of catching up to practice. So we know that just because a new policy landed 3 years ago does not mean that we fully are, have everything figured out in terms of practice. And so we'll be talking about those with that in mind. We're going to be talking about 2025 legislative updates, extended foster care eligibility determinations. We've got SB 407, immigration, transitional housing placement flexibilities. That's one of those that has been around a little while, but maybe has some nuances that we can talk about today. Transitional living setting, FUP and FYI vouchers, and THP plus. California Foster Youth Tax Credit, and SB 624. We do have a resource document, which when I am not the one talking, I will drop the link into the chat for everyone to make sure you have that to kind of follow along. It's got some facts for you. And then we may also have some fact sheets from JBay and some up-to-date JV forms for you as well. Any resources that you're needing, if you're needing reference to something, please drop that in the chat, and I will be looking at the chat. I have a little bit lighter load than the rest of our panelists, and so I will be able to attend to getting that information out to everyone who might need it. Did I miss anything on that, Christina?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
All right, so extended foster care has been in effect really since 2012. It started with the Federal Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act all the way back in 2008. And so much has changed since it was signed into law and took effect. And having worked in child welfare beginning in 2009 and seeing what outcomes were happening for transition aged youth as they were going into the world, having to leave their foster homes, maybe going back to some unhealthy situations with family members because they didn't have a lot of options, or ending up in lots of different circumstances that were really challenging without a safety net. I can say that while it's not perfect, so much has happened that has really supported our youth through extended foster care to give them a bit more time, a bit more of a safety net to get into adulthood in a little bit different and better way. And the outcomes are really promising. There's always there's always more that we can do. In 2020, Governor Newsom signed an executive order to prevent youth from exiting extended foster care. So tending to our youth during the pandemic who may have aged out at a really difficult time. We're kind of on the other side of that now and looking ahead to the future of what this could look like. I know there's a push to do some things to help make the extended foster care situation better for our youth and to help them have the support that they need in really difficult economic times as well currently. I am going to go ahead and pass it off to Christina, who's going to share some hot off the press 2025 transition age youth legislation with us. You heard it here first.
Thanks, Don. And I'm definitely going to go out of order on these, but these are all directly 2025 legislations that are were just passed through the governor in October. So these are brand new. They're definitely not live, and most of these will be going live of January 1 of 2026. And so the first one we're going to go over is AB 373, which this bill really updates the Welfare and Institution Codes of Section 317, which is a section that defines the duties of attorneys and appointed that are appointed for youth and foster care. Previously, attorneys for non-minor dependents were directed to represent the youth's wishes, except when doing so conflicted their protection or safety. AB 373 removes that exemption. Now counsel must represent the expressed wishes of the non-minor dependent. It also removes the requirements that counsel for non-minor dependents advocate for their protection, safety, or well-being. That language still applies to minors, but for non-minor dependents, the attorney's role is now clearly to represent what the youth wants. So the key shift is really recognizing that non-minor dependents are adults in extended foster care, and then their counsel's role is to support their autonomy and express wishes. The next bill that we're going to be going over is AB 896. This one is really about placement transition planning and really helping youth when they move between placements or exit foster care to reunification. It requires that each county child welfare agency to adopt a placement transition planning policy, and the policy must include opportunities for youth and, when appropriate, their current or most recent caregiver to provide input on transition. Guidance is for social workers on gathering input, sharing information, and considering educational, mental health, cultural, relational, and developmental needs during transitions. If a youth's current placement cannot be preserved, that the social worker must ensure that the appropriate placement transition planning happens in line with county policy. And as we know through prior legislation around AB 2247, really understanding that the any unplanned placement changes are restricted and that these placement changes cannot happen between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. This legislation really highlights some of that and really hits on that unless all key parties, meaning the young person, if they're older than 10, the current caregiver, the new caregiver, and the social worker all agree that a placement change can happen between the times of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. They cannot happen. And then we also, through this CDSS, will have to issue guidance to counties on best practices for placement transitions, and counties will need to submit their adopted policy to CDSS. There are current counties, such as Fresno County, who really have a transition policy already put in practice. And so we are going to be looking for some of those counties that are already currently doing some transition policies to kind of provide best practices through the rest of the counties that are now going to be required to submit a plan before January 1st. And then the next bill we're going to talk about is AB 1314. This bill addresses the barriers and inconsistencies that youth, especially youth in the LGBTQ and gender expansive youth, have faced when trying to access or stay in transitional housing placements. This bill requires that county contracts with transitional housing program providers cannot include terms that create unreasonable barriers for qualified foster youth to admit into or continue participating in a program. Youth cannot be denied housing opportunities based on local contract rules that go beyond what the state's licensing standards require. Previously, in some counties, contracts had extra restrictions like additional screening processes, curfews, or program requirements that were inconsistent statewide. This bill really ensures more equitable youth-centered approaches across the counties, making it sure that all policies are aligned with what state licensure says. And it mandates that the decisions made about sharing bedrooms, bathrooms, living units must be led by program participants, and the young person must collaborate with the providers in that decision-making process. So rather than a provider or county imposing a one-size-fits-all rule, youth will have the autonomy to get to have a say in what feels safe, comfortable, and affirming for them. This is especially important for young people who may have experienced housing instabilities, discrimination, or trauma connected to identity or privacy. This also means, again, That means that county agencies can no longer add conditions that conflict or are stricter than what the state already regulates. The goal is to make transitional housing program participation consistent and accessible statewide and to remove duplicative rules that have historically limited program flexibility or can create confusion around county expectations and state regulations. And the other one that's on the screen is SB 624, but we're really going to go into that next when I pass it over to Simone to talk about the foster youth tax credit. So with that, Don, you can go to the next slide, and Simone, I'll throw it over to you to talk about the foster youth tax credit.
Thanks, Christina. All right. So as Christina shared, this is a new bill that passed this year, and it takes effect January 1, but it does have sort of specific dates associated with it. Or the bill she was talking about. First, I'll introduce the tax credit, then I'll talk about the bill. So the California Foster Youth Tax Credit has been around since 2023. It was established in 2022, but first available to young people in 2023 during that tax season. And it's a tax credit. It's the first tax credit in the nation specifically for current and former foster youth. And I believe still the only tax credit in the nation. So this is a really groundbreaking resource for young people. And the key is making sure they know about it. It provides really, it started at $1,000. It gets a little increase each year, just like foster care rates do, right? So it gets that inflation increase. And so where it is now is this past tax season, it was $1,154. Next tax season, it will be $1,189. And that is the maximum value of the credit. It's a cashback credit or refundable tax credit, meaning when young people file their taxes, it doesn't just reduce what they owe if they owe anything. It also provides cash in hand. So if they owe nothing and they qualify for the full tax credit, they would get that full amount. If they owe some little portion of taxes, that would be taken out of the credit and then they get the remaining amount. And eligibility is in terms of age, between the ages of 18 and 25 during the tax year. So for next tax season, for example, the 2026 tax season, that corresponds with the 2025 tax year, this calendar year. And so if the young person was at least 18 and no more than 25 years old on December 31st, 2025, so later this month, they can file and get it next year. They have to have been in foster care on or after their 13th birthday. So it's a pretty, liberal threshold in terms of it's not, 18. You had to be in care all the way to 18. You just had to be in care up until age 13 at least. And you could be in care for a few days and still be eligible. There's no sort of minimum participation requirement in terms of how long you were in foster care. The challenge with that eligibility parameter, though, is that a lot of those young people are hard to reach because they're not necessarily still connected with the county. Many of them have exited foster care. Some of them maybe were in foster care through the duration of their teens, but they then exited after, turning 21. So really, as a social worker with the county, you have this opportunity to get the word out. So that's the eligible population. You also have to be eligible for the California Earned Income Tax Credit because this is a program of the Cali ITC, which means the young person who's filing would have to have earned at least $1. And that could be from any kind of work, really, but no more than the maximum income threshold. And in the past tax season, that was $31,950. Next tax season, it'll be $32,901. So you have to earn, between $1 and that figure to be eligible. You also have to have lived in California for at least half the tax year. That's a condition of the Cali ITC, and have a social security number, or if you are undocumented, you may have an individual tax identification number, an ITIN. And so either of those are work for filing. Lastly, you can't be claimed on someone else's taxes as a dependent. So if you have young people who are, living in a family setting as their foster care placement, and they are being supported, more than half of their support, is provided by the person that they're living with, then they may be claimed on that person's taxes. And so that's something to check into. But certainly for young people who are in, more independent settings, they shouldn't be being claimed on anyone else's taxes. And if they are, that should be resolved. In terms of verification, because I know that's a big issue with often with benefits, is how is it verified, and how, how do we prove out eligibility? So this is actually done on the back end by the California Department of Social Services through a partnership they have with the Franchise Tax Board, the FTB. And just to be safe, because this is a back end kind of data system, if that somehow fails, there is a backup option. And to be extra safe, when youth are filing, they have the option to upload their word of court letter that, most young people should have when they are turning 18. And so they can upload that letter. And so then for some reason the backend verification files, there's a backup. If that letter's not uploaded, that's okay. If it fails, what happens is they'll send that young person a letter saying, you have to send this letter in to us. So we recommend uploading it if they have it, but if they don't let that stop you stop them from filing and claiming the tax credit. Really nice thing about foster youth tax credit is that it does not impact public benefits. With guaranteed income, there's a lot of steps you have to go through to make sure that either it doesn't impact public benefits, or you sometimes decide which you're going to receive. The tax credit's very different in that way. It is not going to affect your eligibility for, things like CalFresh. This is a little example on the slide, but just, in the 2024 tax season, or the 2020, so that's from last tax season. So I'll just share, in the 2025 tax season, the FYTC provided up to $1,154. And next tax season, like I said, it will be $1,189. And the maximum earnings this past tax season were $31,950. Next year, it'll be $32,901. So just slightly different than what it was last year.
We do have a question in the chat really quick. Is the foster youth tax credit available to youth who were wards and in placement as well, or only for dependency youth?
Great question. I'm so glad someone asked that. Yes, so any person who's legally considered to be a foster youth. And when we talk about young people on the probation side who have a court order for out-of-home placement, they are legally considered foster youth, even though they don't have, they're not on the dependency side. They don't have substantiated abuse and neglect. They don't have an open child welfare case. They're still, in terms of benefits, legally considered foster youth because they've got that out-of-home placement order. So for a young person who has that court order to be anywhere other than home, they are, legally considered a foster youth. So yes. And obviously there's many young people on the probation side that don't qualify because they are, they were not put in out-of-home care, following their release from, juvenile hall, for example. But, that portion of young people that did receive a placement order would be considered, eligible for this credit. All right, so now SB 624. So Christina mentioned this is a new bill, and this is really about what I mentioned earlier, positioning yourself as an outreach champion. The great thing about the foster youth tax credit is it's helping young people's income increase. It's also incentivizing learning a really important independent living skill. Tax filing is something someday we all have to do. So even if young people are not earning enough money legally to be required yet to file taxes, number one, they can, about 96% will have a refund if they file. So there's only a small minority of young people in foster care or that have been in foster care who are owing taxes, we're seeing in the data. And that is usually either because of spending financial aid on non-qualified expenses, or even very common would be receiving 1099s because they have self-employment or gig work. So driving for Uber. If you are 1099ing young people that receive stipends from workshops, please don't do that. So that's how they end up owing. And it's really, a 1099 is really to be issued if you are self-employed. And so this tax credit is really about getting young people that practice to file and understanding what it means to file taxes, because eventually they will need to do that. So we know that outreach is challenging overall when it comes to getting engagement and participation, even in a workshop, right? But this does have money on the other side of it. And it's not just the tax credit, the foster youth tax credit, it's also other tax credits that you get when you file. So young people, some of them are getting quite sizable refunds. For parenting youth, it's upwards of $4,000 to $5,000 when they're filing. So this is something that we really want to institutionalize in county child welfare and juvenile probation in terms of making sure that young people know it's are aware of it, know it's available, and know how to get it. So SB 624 established two requirements. One is a requirement of the state, and one is a requirement of counties. So the state Department of Social Services will now be issuing guidance to county child welfare agencies and probation departments at least every other year. But they've sort of said they'll probably be doing it annually, and they will provide a series of best practices in terms of how to outreach and support young people with filing taxes and claiming the foster youth tax credit and other tax credits they're eligible for. The other mandate here is for county, right? So county child welfare and probation departments requires an annual mailing, hard copy, like paper mailing in the mail, to all non-minor dependents every tax season about how to file their state and federal returns, and what the foster youth tax credit is, how much it's worth, and then how to get assistance. So there are local volunteer income tax assistance sites, VITA sites, and some of them are virtual, and some of them are foster youth specific that we've worked in partnership with other organizations to establish. We strongly recommend those, and how to connect with them and partner with them. So really, this is about outreach. And I'll just say that we'll also be releasing a very soon, in about a month, a county toolkit that focuses on all those outreach strategies, kind of as we approach the 2026 tax season.
Thank you. We're going to pass it over to David for this next slide regarding AB 640.
Good morning, everyone. So you got to remember back in 2012 and I love that first slide with the roadmap because 2008 was the initial legislation that the feds passed that sort of opened the door for extended foster care, but it took 4 years until AB 12 finally passed, and I'd love to tell the history and story behind that. But for purposes of today, just think of it as there was this big bucket of paint. And all they could do in 2012 was throw the paint up against the wall, and it covered most of the wall. But it was a really sloppy job, and they wanted a beautiful wall. So from 2012 to this day, what the people in the Capitol do is they paint in the gaps. And this AB 640 was one of the big gaps that they painted in because, as you know, kids who were eligible, kids who are eligibility is determined when they come into care by the parent's income, right? And the look back provision and all that garbage. You know this, that eligibility determines whether they're 4E eligible based on the parent's income. That was all well and good. But of course, when a non-minor dependent turns 18, they lose access to the parent's income. And so they were not eligible for NMD status, or they just weren't eligible for benefits. And so AB 640 sort of fixes that problem. It's been in place for a while. Um, and what it does is if you have a non-minor dependent whose parents were not eligible for benefits and for reimbursement, it allows you to sort of file this motion pursuant to 388F and take a look at 388 subdivision F if you're curious as to all that it says. It's actually fairly clear for the legislature. Usually they're all gobbledygook. But this one sort of made sense when I read it. So if it made sense to me, it'll make sense to you. Um, and it says kind of what to do to sort of get the parent's eligibility off the books and get the child's eligibility on the books, which should almost every case will be eligible. Um, so should you do this in every case? Not exactly. Let's go to the next slide. Because it's about the money, money. It's all about the money, money. It is about the price tag for those of you who know. It's Christina knows. Good. So don't do it Don't do it reflexively, instinctively. Pause. Ask yourself, does my young adult client have other access to other sources of funds? And if they do, then pause and say, okay, do I really need to do this? Do I really want to do this? Um, and then follow that decision tree to the end. And then if it's a good decision, you do it. Um, I think there's a comment here somewhere about, yeah, petition can be granted without a hearing. Hopefully the attorney for the non-minor dependent will be on board with this. It's pretty pro forma. It should be pretty easy to do. If you have any doubt, wake up your county council, tell them, hey, you got to work for me and do this, and make them do it. So I'm gonna transfer this back now to Don and Simone to go over some specific examples of this.
All right, so we've got a little brain practice for you. So we're gonna throw some scenarios out there, and you're gonna say eligible or not eligible. So first scenario is you have a non-minor dependent who exited extended foster care at age 19, but now wants to re-enter. The county files a WIC 388F petition for immediate re-entry with no gap in services. The NMD signs a voluntary re-entry agreement. Eligible or not? All right, we had one person answer eligible, and everyone else is jumping on the eligible train now. So, well, let's see. Do we have anyone who thinks not eligible? It sounds like a leading question, but it may not be. All right, let's show the correct answer. Yes, they would be eligible. Any thoughts to share on that, David, about why they are eligible?
It fits squarely within the definition and seems like we have a bright group. I am curious as to Julia if she was responding that I think this child would be ineligible. So, Julia, if you could type in the chat why you think that child might be ineligible, there may be something to chat about. But it sounds like for most of you, you sort of got it. And I think we should go on and come back to the comment if it lands in the chat.
All right, we'll go to the next one. Scenario two, by the way, the Menti link is there for you if you need to get back in. Scenario two, you have a non-minor dependent who was previously ineligible because of their parents' income disqualifying them. Are they eligible or not eligible? All right, so most folks are saying eligible. We're going to show the correct answer. They are eligible. I am going to give a moment, David, if you'd like to circle to the comment in the chat. If they had already exited and dependency was terminated, then they cannot re-enter under 388F was the comment.
That's correct. Um, if dependency was terminated, I think in our example, though, dependency had not been terminated. Um, and I think that's the difference.
So if they
So,
exited and it was terminated, then they would not be eligible.
right, then they need to file a new petition to get back in. And yes. So Julia, you are correct. But I think our example also said the dependency jurisdiction had remained, and this is just sort of flopping out parents' eligibility to child.
All right, and clarification. Thank you, Simone. This is about eligibility for federal reimbursement to the county, not eligibility for extended foster care, just to be clear. 640 has no bearing on the youth, just on the county's money, whether they are eligible for those funds. We've got in the chat 388F is for non-minor dependent who is not eligible to Fed AFDC FC as a minor, but could become federally eligible if 388F was completed. All right, we'll go to the next one. Scenario three, a non-minor dependent is a tribal member and refuses not to or chooses not to establish FFP because doing so would reduce tribal services. The county honors this and does not file a petition. Eligible or not eligible? I was having a little fun with the slide and the different ways that you can show people's answers. So thanks for playing with my new way of doing a Mentimeter. This one's got some split answers. All right, we're going to go ahead and show the correct answer. In this case, it would be eligible. David, anything to add to that?
Yeah, for those of you who put not eligible, what that may very well be the end decision not to file. It just means really it's sort of a trick question because you need to have more conversation. They're choosing not to establish FFP because it would reduce tribal services. The obvious next question is, what tribal services do you want to keep? And if they're getting $5,000 a month from the tribe, that would go away, then your answer is easy. We're not going to do this. And so if that's what you guys were thinking, the non-eligibles, then I'm right there with you. As a tribal member, they are eligible to decline to establish. Yes, that's exactly right. And so if they choose to decline, that's great. But before they make that decision, you have to sort of lay out the numbers for them and lay out all the options. So if it's beneficial to them to file this motion and get them eligible, um, through uh, extended foster care, as the eligible folks said, then that's what you're going to do. I would imagine, though, in most cases, the not eligible folks are thinking that usually the tribe's benefits are going to exceed what they would get on the other side. And if that's the case, then yeah, you're not going to file. So, um, hope that makes sense.
If you were conflicted, it was by design. It's not always black and white, and sometimes you got to take that pause, as David said earlier. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Christina on this one. Yes, Christina for SB 407, and I will be dropping in the chat a resource, a guide for you all as just a resource that you can take away today as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Don. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about SB 407. So SB 407 was signed into law in 2023 and is now being implemented across California. It's made important updates to how the state approves, trains, and supports resource families, especially around affirming care for LGBTQ youth. Youth who identify just some real stats around LGBTQ. LGBTQ youth are really overrepresented in foster care. About 30% of youth in care identify as LGBTQ. Historically, they face higher rates of placement instability, rejection, and discrimination. And so SB 407 directly addresses this by requiring that all approved resource families affirm and support LGBTQ youth and children, and now a core standard in the resource family approval process. So for foster care agencies and counties, they've really been throughout the state have been updating their training programs, their screening tools, and evaluation processes to really fully reflect the LGBTQ inclusive standards. And staff are now expected to understand what affirming care looks like, how to assess it during home approvals, and how to support families when they need additional resources or coaching. For resource families, being approved as a resource family now includes demonstrating affirming capacity, the willingness and ability to care for and support youth, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. This means creating homes where youth feel safe, respected, and seen for who they are. And for youth and advocates, really, SB 407 strengthens protections for LGBTQ youth and prioritizes placing them in affirming supportive settings. The goal is really to reduce placements in non-affirming homes and increase stability and safety and belonging for youth in care. This law also aligns caregiver trainings with inclusive trauma-informed practices, helping foster parents and agencies better support well-being, identity, and long-term stability for children and youth in care. And so SB 407 really has made that inclusivity standard not an option. And in California's foster care system, it ensures that every youth, regardless of who they are, has a home where they are firm, supported, and truly belong. And so with SB 407, because it's been enacted in 2023, this has kind of been through implementation for a couple of years now, but we are still hearing some barriers and some gaps that are really happening in counties. And so we're going to go to the next slide and we're going to do some Mentimeters and kind of have some of those conversations around what's challenging, what's going on. And so I'll pass it over to Dawn.
I will check the link after this portion for that document and make sure that we get that document in the chat to you all. And I can do a hard document instead of a link to the document as well. So what challenges are coming up regarding SB 407? I will say that I have heard some murmurs of challenges all across the board from lots of different counties. So hoping to hear from you all. It is anonymous. Feel free to share what challenges you are seeing in the chat. The link to the Menti is in the chat if you need that again. All right, we've got many faith-based homes that are resistant to receive training on being affirming. Yes, I know that that has come up in my past role. I was one of the things that I did in the past was approving adoptive and foster homes through RFA, and that definitely came up at the initial stages of approving homes, and it was something that we worked with to try and mitigate and provide education and information. I think it becomes more difficult maybe when it's a situation of relatives who have these views and they're, the person that you're trying to place with. So that does come up. Older foster parents that are very traditional and won't accept LGBTQ youth. What else? Or does it kind of mostly fall in those two buckets? Lack of placement options for older youth in general. Kids age 12 and older are harder to find or to place because most homes want younger children. Yes. So things have not changed since I was a social worker. Um, I think, a lot of times I heard from caregivers when we were doing assessments that they wanted kids that were younger than their kids because they didn't want anyone who might be a bad influence potentially, or they were scared of teens. And so, finding ways within your community to shed a positive light on teens in care. I know a lot of times, having outreach events or having young people go and speak in front of service organizations can be one way that they can hear the stories, see the youth, get in connection with them in community settings to kind of help dispel that, you know, I think there's a blame that happens for foster youth, and they are not the reason they're in care. They are in care because of actions of other people in their lives who are supposed to care for them. And I think that that needs to really be put out into the community so that people can see that these are our kids who have been in really difficult situations. Getting clarity from the state on what makes someone qualified to be an affirming home. It's very subjective language, not really giving qualitative information that counties can build from. So having clarity on what exactly it means to be an affirming home from the state is a need as well. All right, Christine, I'm gonna let you speak to any of these if you have any thoughts on your end, and then we'll move to the next slide.
No thoughts, more just like with the last one around clarifying what qualifies someone. I think that the idea from the state that I've heard working with them is that they are actually in progress to making some of those guidances more like, more standardized versus more subjective so that they can, actually collect data and qualitative data around that. And so what does that mean? And so we have been talking with young people and building out some listening sessions to feel like what does that look like for young people? What makes them feel safe? What does that look like? And then we're also going to be circling back to counties. So please be look on the lookout for those listening sessions that will be coming across because has been a huge topic that's come up, especially around this bill for technical assistance that counties have been asking for. So the state's listening. It's gonna be a while before we get there.
All right, so more to come on that. We have another one. There is nothing that can be assessed for licensing standards to determine affirming status. Many can say they are willing to be affirming, and it's not always the fact. So, part of that, I guess, would be the assessment, the person doing the assessment and kind of keeping an ear out throughout the assessment process. I know it's kind of shorter than it used to be. When I was doing assessments, it was the full safe home study. But really looking for things that are not congruent, maybe if they're saying they're affirming, but other things they're saying are not congruent with that. Really taking the time to ask those questions, those hard questions, and making sure that youth are going to be placed in homes that are affirming of them because they've already experienced rejection at the deepest level. And so we want to be protective of our youth and make sure that, no matter who they are, that they are receiving acceptance in their homes that we are placing them in care. All right, I am going to move to the next one. If you want to add any additional challenges that come to mind, please do share those in the chat. All right, are there trainings happening with resource families regarding supporting Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus youth? So kind of thinking about on the front end, making sure that caregivers are receiving training and information. Sometimes it's a lack of information that can lead to maybe being a little bit less able, less equipped to support youth who are in this population. But also, as things are coming up in homes, what is there available for families? Maybe you have a youth who is now identifying, and you want to support the caregiver with being able to rise to the occasion and have what they need to be successful in supporting that youth through that. If the answer is no, feel free to say no. So it's covered in our county RFA orientation, but as far as curriculum, I don't think they have incorporated it yet, despite being a county with a robust system of access to Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus programs. So it's in the orientation, but not in the curriculum. So maybe an area of growth for this county to find ways to incorporate that into the curriculum. I know locally we have a Stonewall organization in Butte County, and they do wonderful presentations that we've had on a foster parent night where we invited them to share a meal, and we were able to get that presentation to them just so that they could have more information. Because I think sometimes if we don't know the information, we can be a little standoffish to stuff that feels out of our wheelhouse as well. All right. If anybody has any other thoughts on this one, feel free to add those to the chat. I am going to go to the next slide for the sake of time. All right, and how do you approach these conversations with incoming resource families and kin placements? How do you start that conversation with folks as they are applying to be a resource family, as they are taking maybe a relative placement and needing to be approved for that placement? What are y'all saying to these families to help start that conversation? We have a question. What's the difference between 2S and trans? So two-spirit is more in line with folks who identify usually in the tribal communities with having two spirits. It's very interesting. Highly recommend looking it up and reading some different thoughts that different tribes have about that. It is different from tribe to tribe. Not all tribes recognize that. But I would not do it justice if I was to give you a rundown of what that means. And so I do encourage you to look that up if it's new to you. Oh, sparkle hands. See, I like the sparkles, David. All right. So if you do not have an answer to this, it might be an area to explore yourself and with other workers in your agency or with a supervisor about what you could be doing to approach these conversations early, not waiting for, when a youth is maybe in crisis, they're going through a really difficult time. Maybe they're starting to identify in a particular way and you're having conflict in the home around that. I would say starting these conversations at the very beginning when you're assessing a home or a family for placement and being sure to check in about what support they might need, rather than waiting until, things might be heightened emotionally or there may be some challenges happening within the home that are already difficult to deal with. If I know a youth is LGBTQ, I ask about willingness to accept gender and sexuality rather than cis hetero youth. So asking once you know that that's identified, kind of thinking though, like, what if you don't know? The interactions that we have with youth, we may not always know that information. They may not know yet. It may be something that comes, maybe they're 12 years old and they haven't really figured it out yet. So I do encourage you to be as proactive as possible with these conversations. Even, just assume that any youth that is placed could identify in this way and making sure that they would be supported if that was the case.
Dawn, I wonder
Ask about,
just because we have a few extra minutes to spare around this topic, I wonder if there's folks that are participating in the mentee. If there's like if you've experienced in one of your cases or you've had some of these concerns come up that as a young person has been already placed in a home, how are you going about these conversations if a young person comes to you and says, "Hey, I don't feel like I'm being supported or I don't feel like I'm being affirmed in this home." What do those conversations look like? I wonder if it's different than the level of conversations that happen at the beginning versus what happens during. And are those conversations supported through their worker or versus like their resource parent? Like how do we have conversations with those families if a young person feels that they're not being supported? Because I know one of the biggest barriers that I've heard around this topic is that caregivers and the worker understand like, hey, we feel like we're supporting this young person, we feel like this is happening, and then the young person is also on the other side of that saying, I don't feel supported. And so support looks unique based on each individual. And so child and family team meetings are a great way to have some of these conversations and really get down to like, what does this young person need in order to feel supported, because it is so unique to each person.
yeah, and that speaks to the intention versus how it's received too. And we could have good intentions. We could feel like we're supportive to someone in our home who we're caring for, and they don't feel supported because maybe we're not doing it in a way that feels supportive to them. So having those conversations as well. So I worked as a placement worker in our county and staged interventions quickly, asking about the level of comfort with the LGBTQIA community, child and family team meetings. That is a great space if the child or youth is comfortable with having that information in that space with everyone that is at the table. I think that can be also a great way to think about resources and connections and other types of support that they can access within the community, both for the caregivers and for the youth. I think everyone needs to be an advocate for youth, no matter their role in the span of a case. So, as a placement worker or social worker, even our case assistants would speak up and advocate. I love that. Janine, what county are you from? Just curious. Wonderful. Thank you, Janine, for participating in our mentee in our chat. You're keeping our chat alive over here. You get a gold star today.
Mm, she don't like gold stars. Um,
Oh, no gold stars? Okay.
give her a black star.
Lump of coal. All right, we're gonna go to the next one. I sense that you two know each other.
Oh, very, very well. And Janine's amazing. And as soon as I saw her name on here today, I knew. Um, have a good
Well,
time.
with that, I'll pass it over to you, David.
Yeah, it's my turn. So I would like everybody to use the chat for a quick minute. If you did not go to Beyond the Bench this year, please type in the chat why not. Um, and if you did go to Beyond the Bench, I'd like just a sentence or two about what you thought of it. Let's see how we do here. Um, yeah, that makes sense. Um, okay, that's helpful. Really liked it. I'm so glad. Um, yeah, Deborah, where are you from? Only allowed to send two people. Um, okay, yeah. hmm I'm sorry, Don. Yeah, UCD used to send such a contingent. Beyond the Bench started about 20 plus years ago. It was started by a group of judges that decided that lawyers, judges, and social workers in child welfare are sort of all in it together. And so there was a statewide judicial conference happening every year, and there are a few of them that happen on various subjects. But when it came to child welfare and dependency, Judge Edwards, who some of you may remember, and a couple of others who were amazing, um, got together and said, let's invite social workers to our conference and let's have workshops for everybody, for lawyers, for social workers, for CASA, for any professional involved in child welfare. And it has grown. Now, COVID was a killer, but it was an annual event up until COVID. And last November, right before the week before Thanksgiving, it revived. Um, yeah, absolutely. All are always welcome to crash the conference if you are a professional. We've had a few crashers over the years who are less than professional, but for all of you, yeah, absolutely. If it's near, it was in LA this year, so if you're in LA or if it's usually in Southern California because of costs. But sometimes it's in Northern California, and when it is, I would highly encourage you all to go because it's a good opportunity to see judges without their robes on. They do wear clothes underneath. And it's a really good opportunity just to talk with your lawyers, make some friends. The person you're sitting with across from you turns out is someone you need to know. That's been my experience over the year. The reason I bring it up is because every single workshop I went to at Beyond the Bench, and granted, it wasn't all of them because I blew off a lot of them, um, because there are a lot of dear people that I needed to see, including someone on this webinar who I did not get a chance to spend enough time with. Um, but every workshop I went to Beyond the Bench talked about 827. And it talked about what an awful, terrible, no good, very bad law that is. And if you're a fan of children's literature, type it in the chat. I want to know. Terrible, awful, no good, very bad law. And so there is actually a group of folks, Flexcom are a bunch of really good lawyers who work in the family law section of the bar and the juvenile dependency. Um, Good, that's outstanding. And they are working to amend 827. There's an act called the CARE Act, which requires some amendments to 827 in order to implement that. If you want to know what that is, drop me a line in the chat. I'll send you a message. Um, but 827 in and of itself is terrible and it needs to be amended. There are folks working on it. Um, the rule for 827, and this is what I'll say. Let's go to the next slide because the rule applies to this one as well. Um, if you work in child welfare, you move too fast. Um, and everyone who works in child welfare works way too quickly. So pausing, um, is really important. Also, child welfare is open book. Um, do not ever think you have to memorize anything. The answers are there. Well said, Don. And number three, and most importantly, you are not alone. In fact, as a child welfare worker, you are ordered not to be alone because you have a supervisor and you have program managers, and even the director of the department is responsible to the board of supervisors. So the accountability goes up the chain. And as you're looking at this slide, I don't care if you are the most red-hatted, MAGA-loving, send them all away human, or if you are the exact opposite of that, which is we need to help everyone, and I don't care about your status, I'm going to help you. And all points in between, my advice to you is the same, which is do not do anything without consultation, at least with your supervisor, county council, the friends you're closest with at the agency, because when you are dealing with immigration, LGBT plus and 2S, all of the acronyms, um, I think everyone on this webinar really, yeah, everyone on this webinar really just wants to do a really good job for the families. And the best way to do the best job is to not do it alone, and use the good people that are around you. And laws are changing constantly. Um, this is a very, very fluid area, especially immigration, if you are following anything. And so it doesn't matter to me what your politics are. It matters to me that you understand what needs to be done right now for this child, and you are not alone, and it is not your decision to make alone. And if you have the support of those around you, no matter what, you're going to be fine. And that's what I wanted to say about all of that. Um, Yeah, so Don, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Let's see what we got next here. I went and looked for Two Spirit, so now I need to see who's doing this slide. This is Simone, passing it back to Simone. Welcome back to the conversation.
Yeah, so AB 592 is a few years old now, but it's something that there's no state guidance on it. There's no ACL. So I think it's important that some of the information live here, so that it's not you're not going straight to statute to try to figure out what's going on there. This is really about access to housing and flexibilities with housing. So first, and I'll kind of parse these out. So first, AB 592 allows resource families to serve as host families in the transitional housing placement for non-minor dependents, THPNMD, which is the foster care placement that is a transitional housing setting. So, a family can now be both a foster family, for example, as well as a host family in THPNMD without going through additional certification because they've already been cleared as a resource family, right? So that would be duplicative. And so it's clarifying you can be both. You don't have to jump through additional hoops to then become a host family for THPNMD. I will say the THPNMD host, this is a bit moot because the THPNMD host family is like less than 2% of THPNMD placements. So it's very rare that you're going to come across this. But if you do, that is, you can do that. You can have a family be both. THPNMD has 3 housing models. The most common is what's called the remote site model, where this is probably what people are familiar with, where a young person usually lives in an apartment, usually maybe a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate. And then the second most common is the staffed site or the single site, where also young people are living, semi-independently in housing in the community, but they are, all the young people in that placement or in that program are living in one building, like one apartment building or one home in some cases. It's really intended to be more of like apartment building. There may be people from the community that also live there, but all of the young people in the program are all in that same, building. And then also it's considered staffed because a staff person does live there. It's not 24-hour supervision like a group home or anything like that, but they do live there sort of like a resident advisor, an RA in a dorm, sort of same concept. So those are the more common THP-NMD models that you'll see, but there is a third model called the host family, which is it's a host family, right? Where it looks similar to a foster home, but it's really supposed to be more of a mentor-mentee role because this is a young adult, right? So it's sort of like renting a room from a mentor, except the young person isn't paying for the room. So that's what that looks like. You can now have resource families that are taking in young adults. Maybe they have an in-law unit in the back, or they just have an extra bedroom, and they also have foster children. So that is permitted under this bill. The other changes really refer to sort of a broader umbrella of foster care placement, considered the supervised independent living setting. So under federal law, the supervised independent living setting is the SILS, SILS, is the umbrella category for placements that is over the SILP, the supervised independent living placement, the THP-NMD that we just talked about, and the newer placement called can you go back one? I'm sorry. Called the transitional living setting, the TLS, and that's an emergency placement. So under 592, it's authorizing THP-NMD providers, so those that offer that transitional housing placement, to provide services to young people in any of the supervised independent living settings. So what this means sort of on the ground is that in a county, you could have a THP-NMD provider who is providing services to youth in SILPs or youth in transitional living settings. That was never not allowed, but AB 592 just double clarifies that that is permissible, or that's permitted. I will say the maybe obstacle that I think counties have experienced in actually doing this is there's no established rate. There's no like services only rate statewide that has been established. So there should maybe be some follow-up, either from the state on this or from folks who champion this bill to kind of finish the job, so that there is a mechanism to use this provision to provide services to young people in supervised independent living settings. A county could do it, but you would need to negotiate a rate and figure out what that looks like. So you're allowed to do it. There's just not a lot of precedent because there hasn't been state guidance on it.
And we have one question in the chat, Simone. Do the same rules apply where a non-minor dependent cannot share a room with a minor unless related?
So that was not addressed in this bill. That really is what is in the regulations for THP-NMD. And, those regulations are you're not going to believe me when I say this, but for the last 7 years, those regulations those were amended many years ago in a work group, and it's taken over 7 years for them to be released. So they're sort of, I don't know, in purgatory. And we can maybe share the current requirements related to roommate sharing, minors versus non-minors, if that's helpful, for this placement specifically. I don't want to rattle them off because I don't have them off the top of my head, but we can definitely share them, or I can look them up while we're here on the Zoom, and I can report back to folks with something very literal.
All right, this one's sparking the chat. We've got, how does that work though, since they cannot be in two placements? I've been asking about how to institute this since it came out. Would that mean that the department would need to contract with a THP-NMD program specifically for services only?
So, right, that's exactly. I feel your pain. There's not a precedent. There's not something to look to for the how-to. You don't have to contract in foster care, right? So and this actually came up earlier when Christina was talking about AB 1314 and THP-NMD placements being sometimes overburdened by these unnecessary contract requirements. Number one, I just want to share, contracts are not required for THP-NMD, and they're not recommended. Nobody's saying you should do a contract for THP-NMD. Every young person in extended foster care has a placement agreement that they're in that covers legally, their allowed to be in this placement. And so there doesn't have to be a contract between the county and that placement provider. Only a couple counties really use use contracts for THP NMD. I think, and that really stems from because those counties also, as with almost all counties, they use a contract for THP Plus, which is very different, not a foster care placement, but THP NMD, you don't have to have a contract. So, in terms of contracting for services, you wouldn't necessarily have to sort of, and I'm answering in terms of state requirements. What you may have local county policies that your agency has specifically. I can't speak to those, obviously, but at the state level, there's no requirement that you be in contract with that THP-NMD provider to offer services to young people in these other placements. That might be the route you choose to go because there's not an official rate associated with it, and you would need to negotiate that rate with that provider. But there's nothing in law that says there has to be a contract in place. So it would really be negotiating a rate, a monthly rate with that provider, and then indicating, what the process for how that would work in terms of referral and the process you go through to connect them with that service provider.
All right. And then do we know yet how this would be impacted by CANS and the tiered rate structure?
When we say this, do we know how combining, are we asking about the combining a resource family home with a THP NMD host home? Is that what the question is
Being a
about?
host family, yes.
Oh, paying a host, I'm sorry. It won't affect THP NMD. So here's the thing, rate reform made a lot of changes to different placements and how they are funded, because the funding is now not really as much aligned with placement, but it's different for youth and extended foster care. The rules that apply to minors, really, it's very different for non-minors. Like the idea of the rate following the young person, that really isn't true for non-minors, it's true for minors. So for non-minors, you're going to be tier 1 if you're in a SILP. No matter if you qualify for a higher tier, that's all you can get in a SILP. If you're in THP-NMD, you can be any tier, but the rate is not going to be according to that tier, with the exception of those strength building funds. So the care and supervision rate is moot. That is just still going to be the THP-NMD rate and the THP-NMD housing supplement on top of it. So the money that you pay the host family is not going to change, or it could change if you wanted to, but it's not the money that you're getting for that foster care placement for THP NMD is not going to change. So I would imagine the money you give to the host family wouldn't change. However, on the resource family side, those figures will change based on the tier the young person qualifies for. So no to the host family, yes to the resource family, if that makes sense.
Okay, so we are going to go ahead and move on for the sake of time to our next slide. Thank you for answering those questions, Simone.
Oh,
Lots of
and yes,
nuances.
Janine, I just want to say Janine added extended foster care youth are still needing to do CANS if they are in a host family under an FFA or RFA home. Absolutely. So yeah, that they still have to do CANS, but in terms of the money that for THP NMD, the only change will be that youth have access to those strength buildings, and if they qualify for tier 2 or above, those immediate needs funds, but the placement rate won't. The care and supervision rate won't change. Sorry, it's confusing to talk about without visuals, but hopefully that was clear as mud.
Here's my it's bringing me back to the days of training. Like, what do they mean by this? What are we allowed to do as social workers with this youth? And always trying to plot out the best way forward given all the information we had. So to all of you who are still in that, I send out sparkle fingers and all of the love. Our next up will be AB 1979 with Christina.
Yeah, so there's definitely been some updates to what a supervised independent living setting could look like, right? Really trying to get away from a cookie cutter approach to more flexibility on different types of placements where a young person can live, and that could look a lot different than what we were traditionally used to, such as a home or a dorm or a different apartment or a transitional housing apartment complex, right? So there's 3 types of settings now. One is a SILP as identified in the TILP. a housing certified by THPM NIBD provider. And then the third, which is a new version, which is the county approved transitional living setting. And Don, you can go to the next slide. And so what is a transitional living setting? So this transitional living setting, one, is meant to be really a short-term placement that can basically be anywhere other than a homeless shelter. It is meant to be an in-person spot where youth is transitioning in between placements or re-entering extended foster care, and transitional living settings are not subject to licensure. Again, some of those examples could be hotels, motels, couch surfing, brief stays with friends, family members, NERFMs, a room or apartment that someone is requesting to be approved as a SILT, but it hasn't been yet. And a transitional living setting doesn't require a readiness assessment, nor does it require the individual approval requirements like a SILP. The overall intent is a homelessness prevention, and youth are eligible for foster care and maintenance payments while they are in a transitional living setting. So they should be receiving their SILP rate. There is no time limit in the law or how long a youth may be in a transitional living setting. However, some counties may attempt to limit how long a person can stay in a transitional living setting, but our recommendations and we definitely advocate that we don't restrict that, right? We don't really, we want to make sure that we are providing flexible placements for young people as they're trying to figure out what to do, or if there are more appropriate or available foster placements elsewhere, we can figure that out as well. Simone, do you want to add anything to this around like the flexibility piece or just around transitional living settings?
I think I'll just say maybe an example is helpful because I feel like a lot of this is if there's not precedent, it's hard to imagine what it looks like. And so I'll say one thing is in LA, what they've done is a lot of counties are doing motel and hotel vouchers still because that's the most quick and easy thing that you can do temporarily. But one thing that LA is doing that is more kind of mapped out and in response to just having these gaps in placements for young people that do have a lot of needs is they have a transitional living setting that they have contracted with TAY provider who has actually a campus and offers studio apartments. And these are all temporary situations where, if a young person is between placements or just entered care, doesn't have a good placement yet, they've kind of have available beds, right, open so that temporarily that young person can be in that setting. It provides a lot of support because sometimes those transitional periods are those times when you need the most support, but you're getting the least, right? There's that lack of stability because you're not stable housing wise. And so they've really designed it to come in and be a robust supportive placement during that temporary period. And so nothing is stopping a county from doing that, but there's flexibility. So that's not required, but it's something that LA has done that seems to be working well.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Simone. And so we're gonna pass it back over to Dawn to kind of give us some more time to reflect on what the counties that you all are working in are doing and how you are utilizing this. So we would love to know what flexible options you're using in your county.
What she said. So if you could go ahead and go into the Menti. If you're not in it anymore, I will drop the link in the chat in just a moment when I find it again. But we would love to hear what is it that you're doing? What kinds of placements are you using for youth who are in need of a more immediate placement? Because I think that there's a lot of really creative ways that counties have utilized these types of placements. Hopefully some of those who are on the call today. We've got women's shelters, prior foster placements, relatives. I love the idea of connecting them back to prior foster placements. I know that's one that I've used previously, as well as maybe someone that they have a connection with, like a coach or a teacher, for those temporary situations. Got out of county placements. Shout out to those in tiny little counties that are needing to travel a little bit to find places for kids to be. What else? Former Casas, that is an awesome one. We've used sober living as one for a youth who was unhoused largely because of challenges with substance use. And so that was one that we utilized. It was a women's shelter, sober living, and it was a wonderful opportunity to connect with older women who've kind of been through it and could mentor that youth in ways that someone who hadn't gone through that experience could do. We had a kid who went away to college camp in the summer before moving into their THP program. Love that. Hotels, older siblings' houses. Yes. Community college dorms. Awesome. There are some basic needs programs at some of the colleges. I know Chico State has a really robust basic needs program. I used to work with them, so I know about it because I worked with it. And we did place former foster youth in that setting, and it would be a potential option for youth who are maybe of college age or connected with a college. All right, we're going to go to the next one, but if you have other ideas, please do drop those in the chat, or if you're not able to access the Menti for some reason. What challenges are you experiencing with accessing flexible housing options? What challenges are coming up for you? Or if you haven't faced that challenge yet, maybe what challenges do you see that could prevent you from accessing them? People wanting to get paid? And that could just be like, not just wanting to get money, but needing it as a resource to be able to support that youth, right? It may be difficult for them to wait for some type of aid, and they may not be able to do it financially, especially in our economy right now. Less and less availability for housing, wait lists, NMD substance abuse, shortage of transitional housing options for regional center youth transitioning into extended foster care. Yes, huge challenges there.
Dawn, one thing to highlight about the transitional living setting is it can't be a shelter and it can't be a youth homelessness prevention center, which is a youth shelter, but it could be something related to substance use treatment. Like that is not something that is prohibited by any means. So just wanted to clarify that it is pretty flexible.
Do you have any ideas around the options for regional center youth?
That's a tough one. I don't think I'm the best person to answer that, but there are people that have worked extensively on that. And are the Angie Schwartz, who is with CDSS, has worked extensively on that before joining CDSS, and I imagine I imagine there could be some guidance there that the state could issue or could share.
All right, we got non-minor dependent behavior that could be challenging. People allowing us to assess their home, family, and friends due to not wanting child welfare services to be in their home, but they still want to help the youth. And then lack of placements for teen or non-minor dependents. Christina, do you have any other thoughts to share on any of these challenges, best practices, things that come to mind for you?
No, I mean, I was just gonna say, I think that we could pretty much do a whole nother webinar based on the gaps and barriers that we see with regional centers and extended foster care and what that partnership really looks like, because there's just a lot of barriers and gaps. And there's definitely some guidance that's needed on figuring that out. And so we definitely see it. It's not folks are seeing that there is huge issues there, especially when it comes to who's responsible for payment and who's responsible for actually supporting the young person. Is it the regional center? Is it child welfare? What does that look like? And so yeah, it's definitely seen, and it's a huge barrier that we definitely should address quite soon.
All right. We're going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass it back over to Simone for FUP and FYI vouchers and housing support. I know we did a full extended foster care session with Ruthie White. Christina and I did last fiscal year. That was amazing. I learned so much about this, and I also learned that there were extensive challenges that counties were facing with accessing these vouchers. So hopefully today we'll check in and hear that things are going a little better, or we're on track with that. But if not, there are lots of resources and lots of folks who are doing this work.
Thanks, Dawn. So these vouchers are kind of, just to back up a little bit, when youth exit foster care, say at age turning 21, right? California does have, comparatively, compared to other states, a robust set of resources for young people in terms of housing. No, there is not enough support for every single person who leaves care to be in housing paid for by the state or the county, but it is robust compared to what a lot of other states have. And what that set of housing is really either transitional housing that's funded by the state and the county, or federal housing vouchers, which are funded federally, but are sort of supplemented with services that are funded by the state. And so just to kind of see where this lives. So this is for young people who really are 18 up through 24, but predominantly youth are getting these vouchers closer to when they're older, because mostly, youth are participating in extended foster care at age 18, 19, and 20, right? So 18 through 24, so not yet 25. And that age eligibility applies to when the young person not just receives the voucher, but really when they sign their housing assistance payment contract, right? So you have to make sure, if you have an older young person, particularly someone who's leaving transitional housing, THP plus, maybe they are already 24, you've got to start that process soon before their 25th birthday, because if they time out, if they turn 25 before they're in that housing assistance payment contract, they can't get that voucher anymore. And it sometimes takes a while to find housing, lease up, get through that process. So if you leave with one thing today, it's the timing of making sure for those older young people that you get them into that contract before they turn 25. All right. Now, the thing that makes this voucher valuable is how flexible it is. So you don't have to wait till the young person exits to request their voucher. You can request it. Oops, and it looks like these didn't get updated, but this 90 days is now 180 days. So this was a recent federal change. It used to be 3 months, 90 days. It's now 6 months, 180 days. So the youth had to have exited foster care, and that includes out-of-home probation, or will exit within 180 days. So 6 months before a young person exits, and we know when young people are exiting, right? We know that this is all planned out. We can request a voucher because that young person maybe doesn't have a housing plan, or maybe they have a housing plan, but we're worried it'll fall through for when they leave care. The last little eligibility piece there is that they have to have been homeless or at risk of homelessness at age 16 or older. And I know you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. You're right, it doesn't. So the way that this works is the feds used to pair eligibility with age 16 in terms of foster care. They used to say you have to have been in foster care on or after your 16th birthday. That changed. Eligibility for this has been blown wide open, meaning you could have been in foster care at any point and be eligible for these vouchers according to federal eligibility definitions. They moved that 16-year-old piece to you had to have been at risk of homelessness. Now, they might as well pull that last bullet off, because any young person leaving foster care is considered at risk of homelessness. So don't worry about that third bullet. Just know that it's the age eligibility and when if they're about to exit foster care. And again, these vouchers are available to young people who exited at age 17, who exited at age 12, who exited at age 18, who exited at age 20, doesn't matter. However, counties may employ their own higher threshold eligibility rules in their county. And that's largely because, like I said, it used to be you had to have been in care on age 16 or older, right? So it's important to understand that even though the federal eligibility is broader, a county may say, we still use the 16 rule because we've got more demand than we have vouchers for, and this is our way of tapering it off. So that, do what you want with that information. That's what it is. Now, what the program provides is up to 36 months of housing assistance via a housing choice voucher coupled with supportive services. So HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, issues these housing choice vouchers. If you're, closer to my age, you might know these as Section 8 vouchers. That was more frequently what they were called, back in the 90s. And they are coupled with supportive services that are provided or secured by the County Child Welfare Agency. So the housing choice voucher is issued from HUD to a public housing authority, which there are many in the state. There's over 100, right? And there's city housing authorities and there's county housing authorities. So the County Child Welfare Agency enters into an agreement with a housing authority, multiple housing authorities, as many as you can do. Each housing authority can get vouchers from HUD. So the more housing authorities you're in agreement with, if you're in a larger county, the more vouchers you can get for young people. So these are 3-year vouchers. They can be extended for an additional 24 months or 2 years if the housing authority has the family self-sufficiency program and the young person agrees to participate in it, or if they don't have FSS or it's impacted, the young person can fulfill participation conditions that look very similar to extended foster care participation conditions, by the way, and get that additional 2 years. The difference is that if you're in the family self-sufficiency program, it does come with some services itself. And really nice is that there's an escrow account associated. So the way that vouchers work is it provides affordable housing. It provides a rental subsidy, right? The rental subsidy works such that you will never be paying more than 30% of your income on rent. So as you increase your income because you're earning more money, your rent will go up. If you're in FSS, whatever amount your rent goes up, you're paying into is then put in an escrow account. And then you get to take it with you when you leave, thousands of dollars. So this is a savings program for young people. Now, if they don't have FSS, that's okay. They still can get the extension through the participation conditions. But if the housing authority has FSS, they should definitely do it. And they're entitled to it if they're in this program. So this can be a voucher that lasts up to 5 years. You can get it as early as 18, as late as 24. So if you do the math, you could have this voucher all the way up till age 28. Okay, so these are gold. These are really great. The challenge is that it's federal policy with significant local discretion. So if a housing authority or a county child welfare agency says, we don't want to participate in this, it's not accessible to the young person. You have to have 2 agreeing parties. You have to have a housing authority and a county child welfare agency saying, we want this money from HUD, which, by the way, is still available. Let's newsflash. There were no cuts to FYI. This is funding that is remaining available, and the First Lady has even picked it up as like a pet project. So the money is safe, at least, for now. Meanwhile, all these other federal programs are being cut. So this is a place we can still double down. We can still get federal money. And this money is, again, that is the rental subsidy. The County Child Welfare Agency is responsible for providing or securing supportive services, the case management, education, employment support, and most importantly, helping that young person turn the voucher into a lease because they have to find housing. They need that housing navigation from the services, sometimes landlord incentives, right? You've got to land a unit. And that young person has to be on the lease and fill out a bunch of paperwork, right? Oh, no, Janine, I mean Melania Trump. I'm not talking about Jennifer Newsom. I'm not talking about the first partner. I'm talking about Melania Trump. She has picked this up as a pet project under her Be Best initiative, making the money safe, essentially. So I'll just say that it was flat funded the last few years, and the funding isn't going anywhere as of now.
We have a question really quick. Does a non-minor dependent need an income other than the AB-12 stipend to receive an FYI voucher when they are close to turning 21?
No, they do not have to have an income. It's not required. If they participate in the FSS program to get that extension, though, they would have to be participating in education or employment. And yeah, so that's the requirement. The last thing I'll share on this is just the process to get the vouchers, because this is, and I think David chatted earlier that something about the 90-day transition plan. The reason this is such a great tool for the 90-day transition plan is that there are two ways you can request the voucher. One is the traditional way through a competitive NOFO, right? Notice of funding opportunity, where housing authorities would apply each year for vouchers and they would get an allotment of anywhere from like 0 to 75 vouchers. There's now a second process that's specific to FYI, where young people can get vouchers on a rolling basis, on an on-demand basis. Each housing authority can get up to 25 per request, or up to 50 in a federal fiscal year. So again, the more housing authorities you partner with, if you're in a larger county, the more vouchers this opens up, and they can get the on-demand and the competitive all in the same year. So the way that works is you have a young person who's approaching their exit date. You know they're probably going to need housing. You, and when I'm saying you, I mean you, the county child welfare agency, the social worker, you request through the public housing authority a voucher for, the young person for, Simone Turekli needs a voucher. Here's the verification information for her. I'm sending to you. Then the housing authority turns around, fills out a very simple form to HUD, and the voucher comes within a couple months. So you can do this for one young person at a time, or you can say, here's a list of 25 young people and all of their verification eligibility information. And those vouchers come in real time. So that is what makes it very valuable as a transition planning tool. So I know I spent a long time on this, but I just wanted to really be clear how much of a resource these are. So I think, and then the next slide really talks about, okay, so what do I do today, right? So first step is, if you don't already know, is figuring out if you have vouchers in your county. So if your housing authority or housing authorities are in partnership, with your agency, then you can request vouchers, today, right? If you're not in agreement, then you would want to talk with your leadership and approach a local public housing authority about entering into a formal partnership. So this can be a letter of commitment, or it can be an MOU. And again, the housing authority doesn't have to agree, but the thing that really sways them is that you are covering the supportive services. They knowing that there's someone to come swoop in when there's issues is a huge relief to them, because that is part of the challenge of them administering these programs. So just seeing if there's anything else I've left off here. Oh, and we have a roster where we have all the points of contacts in each county for FUP and FYI. So that's there on the screen, and people can check and see the status in their county if you don't already know. I see we have FYI vouchers, but are being told they need an income. I'll double check on if that's like maybe a local housing authority policy. I have not heard that, but we can look into that and get back.
And then we have the problem we are having is we submitted the first batch of FYI apps now that our county has approved everything, and we don't even know if the housing authority has requested any yet many months later.
So I would follow up with the housing authority and ask them for a status update on every young person that you've submitted for, because they'll usually be able to say, because they enter information into a voucher management system, voucher management system. And so they'll be able to say, has the request been submitted to HUD, assuming these are on demand? If they're competitive, that's different, because that's going to come around a specific time of year, and it's going to come in a batch. But if you sent them individual young people and the understanding was that they were requesting on-demand vouchers, I would ask for a status update on each of the young people's vouchers, because they can say whether it's been requested and issued to the housing authority, just requested and they're waiting on HUD for issuing it. And then again, once it's issued, then it would be, or excuse me, awarded, then whether it's issued to the young person. So that they should know the stage that each young person is in. And so if they haven't received them from HUD yet, they should be able to share that with you. And I also will say right now, this is complex and unfortunate, but although FYI funding is safe and there's absolutely still federal funding for the program, there are housing authorities that, based on local challenges related to budget and all of these other changes happening related to other federal cuts, some of them have said, we're pausing vouchers for right now. Even though this funding is available, we're hitting pause on every voucher program we issue. We've discouraged this. We don't want this to happen. We hope it's not happening in your county, but we have heard of this. So I don't want to paint like, oh, it's all great. Like, there are challenges that are very real and that have to do with all of the kind of turmoil that's happening politically right now and budget wise.
I will say that I attended one of these webinars prior to being in this position. I was working with foster youth at the college, and I walked away really excited to go access those vouchers, and they hadn't quite hit my county yet. And so, if that's you, I know the feeling. It's difficult, but we do have another option for you, THP Plus. I'm sure y'all have heard of it. So, Simone, I'll kick it back to you for THP Plus, and then I think we'll be doing a little check-in as well.
Great. And Alexa, I see your comment that it says we're not allowed to contact the housing authority directly. ILP contacted them and they said they didn't know, I guess, what was going on. I'm happy to talk offline if you want to shoot me. I'll put my information in the chat, just if that's helpful, to see if I can help you troubleshoot. And I'm happy to reach out to the housing authority as well. Okay, so THP Plus, or I'll say transitional housing for former foster youth. So this, so I'm going to talk just more generally about the transitional housing program that's available to young people. This expansion happened a couple of years ago. So what I'll share, instead of focusing on the expansion, is just focus on what's available. So transitional housing has been around for former foster youth in statute since 2001. So 24 years ago, right? There was a bill passed that established what was called the THP Plus program. And this was before there was extended foster care. It was sort of the only show in town for young people after 18 that needed help with housing. So it's still a pretty much the same program model. It offers support, basically supportive transitional housing. It is usually apartment living usually with a roommate, and there are supportive services provided throughout. Housing is either fully covered. Most counties fully cover the housing. Some counties, it's a deep subsidy, but either way, it's very affordable housing. And it is a 3-year program. It used to be a 2-year program. It is a 3-year program, and youth can be in the program up until they turn 25. So very similar to vouchers, at age 24, they can be in the program, but once they turn 25, they would have to leave the THP Plus program. And because there's that 3-year time clock, it's whichever comes first. So if you can get your 3 years in before you turn 25, ideally, you get those full 3 years. If you start and you turn 25 before that 3-year time clock is up, you do have to exit at 25. So that's the program that has been in place for ages. As you can imagine, with extended foster care, it's really a program for 21 to 24-year-olds. You've got about 2% are 18, 19, and 20 in that program. So we really encourage young people to maximize their options by being first in extended foster care, then go into THP Plus, and hey, then try to get a voucher. Like, if you're in an expensive county, maximize that runway of housing support. So it's funded, and the THP Plus program, the traditional THP Plus program, you have to have been in care on or after your 18th birthday. So it's not as flexible as vouchers. It's not for young people who exited at 15, exited at 12, right? You have to have been up until turning 18 at least to access this program. Now, this is a program that was realigned in 2011. So even though it started out state funding, $34.9 million, that $34.9 million was realigned to counties in 2011. So now it's technically county funding that counties receive each year for this program. A few years back, we expanded support for transitional housing for former foster youth by establishing a state funding source for it. Because again, we couldn't grow a realigned program. We couldn't grow county funding at the state level, right? Because of realignment. So we just established a new program called the Transitional Housing Program, just to keep everyone nice and confused with all these similar names. That transitional housing program today, I won't go into that story, but today is a $33.3 million program. So that plus the $34.9 million is what makes up the bulk of this funding for transitional housing. The catch is the transitional housing program that comes from the state is quite flexible. The age parameters hold true, the 18 to 24, but the rest blow out the water. So you could use that portion of that transitional housing program funding that you get to say, we want housing slots that don't max out at 3 years, or we want housing slots for young people who exited at, 16 or older or at any age. But again, similar to vouchers, that is what's allowable. That may not be what your county is doing, but you could always say to your county leadership, we think this is a good idea because we're getting young people who don't meet the THP plus requirements and we want to help them. So just like to give everyone full information about that. There's also an additional $9 million that sits on top of that for 5 counties that are very high cost to make sure that they can cover housing rental increases. I think that, oh, one more thing that is on the slide there. Each county's budget for this program, I won't say for this program, for transitional housing for former foster youth is on that link on the screen. So you can look and see, like, what are we working with in my county? And what does that equal to in terms of number of youth you can find out locally? So just wanted to make that available. We also have a roster that lists all the providers for this program. We also have that for THP NMD that if you're looking for new providers in neighboring counties, you can kind of snoop around and see who's doing this. So I think that is it.
Thank you. And this may look different from county to county as far as, I heard expansion and I thought, oh goodness, that's great. No more wait lists. That might not be the case for your county. Depending on which county you're in, it may have added like 2 beds or it may have added, more depending on where you're at. It also means that youth are able to stay longer, which can also impact potential for wait lists because prior to this, it was a county option to go up to 36 months, and not all counties were doing that. They were capping it at 24 months. And so, with that addition of time available to youth who might have already been in the program, you might not see wait lists completely clear out for youth that you're trying to get into these programs. Sign up early, get on the wait list if that is a thing, and make sure that you're connecting youth early, even if you think they've got it covered as they're exiting extended foster care, because we know that when all support falls away at that point, that might be a time where they struggle the most. Where is the THP NMD provider list for the state?
I'm grabbing it right now.
Okay, great. So Simone will put that in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and go to our next slide. Does your county have access to FYI FUP vouchers? So the options are yes, no, and I'm going to let you say unsure on this one, but you have homework to go find out if you are in my unsure category. And we provided the link in the chat where you can go and check. All right, so we got 1 no, 3 yes, 4 unsure. Oh, we're getting some more yeses. That's awesome. I kind of like this visualization. It's like turning as people answer. So for those of you who are unsure, your homework for today is to go find out, ask those questions and see how you can access that for youth, because I think it is a really great resource if you're able to get that for them. Simone put in the chat the THP NMD roster. It's a roster maintained by JBay. The states list comes from the Rates Bureau, so it's not listed in a way that's accessible for identifying programs by location.
Yeah, can our no person put in the chat what county we're talking about?
Oh, who is our no? If you're feeling confident in putting that in the chat, we won't tell anyone. We won't even say it out loud. All right. Well, I'll leave open you don't have to if you don't want to. We'll go to the next slide.
But I'll say,
All right,
Dawn, if anyone's interested in getting support with contacting their housing authority or just around this program, we're happy to provide technical assistance and support in that manner. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you. All right. So what challenges have you experienced around accessing these housing vouchers? I think some of that came up in the chat, but if there's any lingering challenges that you'd like to share, there's space to do that. And David is offering support as well for whoever said no. You can go ahead and reach out to David. David, if you could throw your email in the chat, that would be wonderful, just in case they don't have access to message us directly.
We have a no. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
I've never had access to them, but I know who our county contact is to get access to them. Okay.
And thank you, Eric. That's awesome.
All right. Sometimes we don't know what we have access to if it hasn't come across our knowledge base yet. Okay, so homework, find out how to access those vouchers, find out if you do have access to them, get to know what resources are available for housing after extended foster care. I know sometimes there's a view that we're doing too much, that we're enabling our youth in ways that, feel like we're like it's too much, like they're not going to learn how to live on their own. But I will say this, I don't know how many of y'all have seen the trends in our general population in terms of how much support folks are getting moving back home. We've got multi-generational housing going on where folks are living with their parents, even at much older ages. I think the last thing I heard was 30 is kind of the average of like still receiving pretty considerable support from parents. And I actually think that number may be higher just based on having worked with the college population, folks going to college a little bit later sometimes because of different things. And it's hard right now. And so for lots of reasons, people are needing that additional support. I want to share with you all, I'm going to put it in the chat. We have a resource page for us available for you all through UC Davis. So this is the end of the webinar piece, but I do want to share with you some exciting things around resources that are available to you and additional trainings. Um, it looks like it's not sharing what I think I'm sharing, so let me reshare my screen so you can see what I've got up there. All right, so we have the transition age youth and extended foster care. It's linked in the chat. This is our resource hub at UC Davis, and keep an eye on this because things are always changing. We're always adding to it. We have a toolkit linked here that we took on in the past fiscal year. And so this is our CSEC toolkit that has all kinds of information and tools available to you. If you go down a little bit, you'll see this is last year's Extended Foster Care Legislative and Practice Updates webinar. We will be posting our newest recording. So if someone's looking for that, we have it there. It's a lot of information. I'm sure it feels a little bit like a fire hose. So just know that you can access that recording. We also have ability for you to enroll in a training through UC Davis. We have lots of open enrollment options for you. The most pertinent one here is tomorrow we're having an extended foster care learning collaborative. And what's cool about this coming right after our webinar is that we've had you all on mute all day and you haven't been able to talk with each other. And this is really that space to not only be in community with other people, be able to come off mute, to share your thoughts, to have that cross-county collaboration. You'll also get to see Christina again, and I'm sure that you didn't get enough of Christina today, so that's exciting news. We've got Emma Black joining Christina, and then a panel of former foster youth. Christina, do you want to share anything about the panel?
Yeah, we have 3 former foster youth that are, or actually there are some current mixes in there. Going to talk about their lived experience within the extended foster care program and what they've learned and what they would want providers and workers to know to better support current youth. And we also have another young person coming in and who is actually going to lead that panel. So we're really excited to just have a bunch of lived experience in the room to provide expertise in different ways than we're used to. And so I hope to see you all there if you can.
Awesome. And then Simone, I think there is something coming up with J-Bay as well. I'm going to stop sharing so I can go and find it, but do
Tomorrow?
you want to share that?
Is it tomorrow, that one?
I believe so.
Yeah, I can grab the registration link, but we're hosting a webinar tomorrow with featuring the Transition Age Youth Research and Evaluation Hub, TAY-Hub. They took some data from the Cal Youth Study. You know, they're headed up by Dr. Mark Courtney, who did the Cal Youth Study. So they took some data from the Cal Youth Study and also some state administrative data and identified the impact on homelessness that extended foster care has. And spoiler alert, extended foster care is reducing young people's risk of homelessness, and specifically FFA placements and THP NMD placements are the driving force in reducing that homelessness risk. So we are excited about that and wanting to share it. So we are going to host a webinar tomorrow where Dr. Mark Courtney is going to walk through those findings, and we'll also have some folks on to provide the provider perspective, and talk through implications for rate reform and other things going on. So please join us if you can. It is tomorrow from 10 to 11:30. And I will put the registration link in the chat.
Is that the Eyes on California?
Yes, it is called, so I should have led with the name. It's called Eyes on California, Extended Foster Care as a Tool to Prevent Youth Homelessness.
All
And
right,
I
so I
just
put the title and the link in the chat, and
Thank you.
then December 11th, there's a bipartisan blueprint for modernizing federal child welfare financing if folks are interested in that. So lots of amazing things. I would say keep your eyes on JBay because they have such awesome things happening all the time. I always learn when I get in space with JBay. We are getting towards the end of our webinar, so I do want to open it up for any of our presenters who might just have some final words. I'm going to pass it first to David because I know David has something to say.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We're going to stick around and answer them all. I want to say that the reason that I do these webinars, this is my third in a row, 3 years in a row, I think, for the EFC, is the reason that I do them is because I get to work and with and learn from the people who are on the screen. None of this happens without Chris Juvenile, who's also from UCD, and so he's behind the scenes, but incredible, always. But Christina, Simone, Dawn, they are just powerhouses of knowledge. They know their stuff. They do all the heavy lift on these webinars. And I'm so grateful that I get to work with them and learn from them. And just want to encourage each of you to reach out if you have any questions, because I know they know what they're doing. And if they don't know the answer, they know who does.
All right,
Thanks,
anything else
David.
you'd like to say, Simone?
I'm just thanks for having me, and pleasure presenting with you all, and thanks everyone who joined and is listening, and happy again to talk through any of the items I talked about today. Happy to talk them through with folks if they want to reach out to me.
All right, well, we'll take questions in the chat, but if you don't have any questions, maybe stick around. Maybe someone has a question that you didn't think to ask. And if there are no questions, I hope that you all get up from your desk. You get to get some healthy movement, get hydrated. I'm always drinking water at all times, even when I'm on screen. So sorry about that, but hopefully it was a good reminder to you all to stay hydrated. And make sure that you're taking care of you first as well, because you cannot help others if you do not help yourself. And I'm a recovering not taking breaks person, and I do take breaks now. So I encourage you to do the same. It will do everything for your ability to help others. Thank you all for joining us. All right, you're getting lots of love in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us for this webinar. I literally could not do this without you.
I don't have sparkle hands, but we're good. There you go.
Sometimes you have to do it old school, you don't have to have an emoji for everything.
All right. I'll work on it. Thank you, guys. I really
Awesome.
appreciate working with all of you.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, I think
Thanks,
we're done at
Dawn.
3, so.